All right, I think we're on. Restream tells me we're on. The impromptu little streaming session. And it's probably a terrible idea. Because your old pal Jason here is had a rough one. And my usual dulcet tones are a little tonight. But I figured it's a good enough night. Got a new thing. You can tell by the way it's a new thing. We're gonna got some noises going on there. Got some coffee and some monkey shoulder tonight. It's not my favorite scotch. It's an Isla, or no, this is a Speyside. Excuse me. Monkey shoulder's a Speyside, and I'm not super into the Speysides, but monkey shoulder's pretty good. It was even on sale. I don't know why that says Hollow Knight. We're not doing Hollow Knight. I've changed it everywhere that I can change it, and it still says Hollow Knight. So, scary stories. Those are books. All of those are story collections. So, I'm gonna go pick 3. We'll pull a story out at random and read it. Fun. Let's do this one. Okay. So we have to pick tonight. Turn that down just a little bit. Let's do this one. This one might be better. Hi, bling blong. We have Alfred Hitchcock's Tales to Make You Quake and Quiver. We have Alfred Hitchcock's Tales to Make Your Hair Stand on End. And Alfred Hitchcock presents Stories That Scared Even Me. I'm thinking this one's going to be a good one. Oh, look. The green screen filter's still on. But this one's seen better days. So, let's go with this one. Because why not? Forward. Here we go. Contents. What do we got? There's a novelette called It by Theodore Sturgeon. We're not going to do that because that's long. And a novel called Out of the Deeps by John Wyndham. That one's also long. Let's do... Man, there's so many. Let's start with this one. Page 46. Prime the old pump here. Men Without Bones by Gerald Kirsch. Oh, just... We got some language. I will have to be careful with this one. Yeah, I'll be careful. Anyway, Men Without Bones by Gerald Kirsch. We were loading bananas into the Claire Dodge at Puerto Padre when a feverish little fellow came aboard. Everyone stepped aside to let him pass, even the soldiers who guard the port with nickel-plated Remington rifles, and who go barefoot but wear polished leather leggings. They stood back from him because they believed that he was afflicted of God, mad, harmless, but dangerous, best left alone. All the time the naphtha flares were hissing, and from the hold came the reverberation of the roaring voice of the foreman of the gang down below crying, "Fruta! Fruta! Fruta!" The leader of the dock gang bellowed the same cry, throwing down stem after stem of brilliant green bananas. The occasion would be memorable for this, if nothing else, the magnificence of the night. The bronze of the foreman shining under the flares, the jade green of that fruit, and the mixed odors of the waterfront. Out of one stem of bananas ran a hairy gray spider, which frightened the crew and broke the banana chain, until a Nicaraguan boy, with a laugh, killed it with his foot. It was harmless, he said. It was about then that the madman came aboard, unhindered, and asked me, "Bound for where?" He spoke quietly, and in a carefully modulated voice, but there was a certain blank, lost look in his eyes that suggested to me that I keep within ducking distance of his restless hands, which, now that I think of them, put me in mind of the gray, hairy, bird-eating spider. "Mobile, Alabama," I said. "Take me along?" he asked. "None of my affair. Sorry. Passenger myself," I said. "The skipper's ashore. Better wait for him on the wharf. He's the boss." "Would you happen, by any chance, to have a drink about you?" Giving him some rum, I asked, "How come they let you aboard?" "I'm not crazy," he said. "Not actually. A little fever, nothing more. Malaria, dengue fever, jungle fever, rat bite fever, feverish country this and others of the same nature. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Goodbody, Doctor of Science of Battleston University. Does it convey nothing to you? No? Well, then, I was assistant to Professor Yoward. Does that convey anything to you?" I said, "Yoward? Professor Yoward? Oh, yes, he was lost, wasn't he? Somewhere in this upland jungle beyond the source of the Amur River?" "Correct," cried the little man, who called himself Goodbody. "I saw him get lost." "Fruta! Fruta! Fruta! Fruta!" came the voices of the men in the hold. There was rivalry between their leader and the big black stevedore ashore. The flares sputtered. The green bananas came down, and a kind of sickly sigh came out of the jungle off the rotting river. Not a wind, not a breeze, something like the foul breath of high fever. Trembling with eagerness, and at the same time shaking with fever chill so that he had to use his two hands to raise his glass to his lips, even so he spilled most of the rum, Dr. Goodbody said, "For God's sake, get me out of this country. Take me to Mobile. Hide me in your cabin." "I have no authority," I said. "But you are an American citizen. Can you identify yourself? The consul will send you home." "No doubt, but that would take time. The consul thinks I'm crazy too, and if I don't get away, I fear that I really will go out of my mind. Can't you help me? I'm afraid." "Come on now," I said. "No one shall hurt you while I'm around. What are you afraid of?" "Men without bones," he said. There was something in his voice that stirred the hairs on the back of my neck. "Little fat men without bones." I wrapped him in a blanket, gave him some quinine, and let him sweat and shiver for a while, before I asked, humoring, "What men without bones?" He talked in fits and starts with his fever, his reason staggering just this side of delirium. "What men without bones? They're nothing to be afraid of. Actually, it is they who are afraid of you. You can kill them with your boot or with a stick. They're something like jelly. No, it's not really fear. It's the nausea, the disgust they inspire. It overwhelms, it paralyzes. I've seen a jaguar, I tell you, a full-grown jaguar, stand frozen while they clung to him in hundreds and ate him up alive. Believe me, I saw it. Perhaps it's some oil they secrete, some odor they give out. I don't know." Then, weeping, Dr. Goodbody said, "Oh, nightmare, nightmare, nightmare. To think of the depths to which the noble creature can be degraded by hunger. Horrible. Horrible." "Some debased form of life that you found in the jungle above the source of the Amur," I suggested. "Some degenerate kind of arthropod?" No, men. Now surely you remember Professor Yoward's ethnological expedition. Excuse me. It was lost, I said. All but me, he said. We had bad luck. In the Anana Rapids, we lost 2 canoes, half of our supplies, and most of our instruments. And also Dr. Terry and Jack Lambert and 8 of our carriers. Then we were in Ahu territory, where the Indians use poison darts, but we made friends with them and bribed them to carry our stuff westward through the jungle, because, you see, all science starts with a guess, a rumor, an old wives' tale. And the object of Professor Yoward's expedition was to investigate a series of Indian folk tales that tallied. Legends of a race of gods that came down from the sky in a great flame when the world was very young. Line by crisscross line, and circle by concentric circle, Yoward localized the place in which these tales had their root. An unexplored place that has no name because the Indians refused to give it a name, it being what they call a bad place. His chill subsiding and his fever abating, Dr. Goodbody spoke calmly and rationally now. He said with a short laugh, I don't know why. Whenever I get a touch of fever, the memory of those boneless men come back in a nightmare and give me the horrors. So we went to look for the place where the gods came down in flame out of the night. The little tattooed Indians took us to the edge of the Ahu territory and then put down their packs and asked for their pay, with no consideration would induce them to go further. We were going, they said, to a very bad place. Their chief, who had been a great man in his day, side riding with a twig, told us that he had strayed there once and drew a picture of something with an oval body and 4 limbs, at which he spat before rubbing it out with his foot in the dirt. Spiders, we asked. Crabs, what? So we were forced to leave what we could not carry with the old chief against our return, and go on unaccompanied, Yoward and I, through 30 miles of the rottenest jungle in the world. We made about a quarter mile a day. A pestilential place. When that striking wind blows out of the jungle, I smell nothing but death and panic. But at last we cut our way through the plateau and climbed the slope, and there we saw something marvelous. It was something that had been a gigantic machine. Originally, it must have been a pear-shaped thing, at least 10,000 feet long, and in its widest part, 600 feet in diameter. I don't know of what metal had been made, because there was only a dusty outline of hull on a certain ghostly remains of unbelievably intricate mechanisms to prove that it had ever been. We could not guess from where it had come, but the impact of its landing had made a great valley in the middle of the plateau. It was the discovery of the age. It proved that countless ages ago this planet had been visited by people from the stars. Wild with excitement, Yoward and I plunged into this fabulous ruin, but whatever we touched fell away to fine powder. At last, on the 3rd day, Yoward found a semicircular plate of some extraordinarily hard metal which was covered with the most maddeningly familiar designs. We cleaned it, and for 24 hours, scarcely pausing to eat or drink, Yoward studied it. And then, before the dawn of the 5th day, he awoke me with a great cry and said, "It's a map of the heavens and a chart of a course from Mars to Earth." And he showed me how those ancient explorers of space had proceeded from Mars to Earth via the moon. To crash on this naked plateau in this green hell of a jungle, I wondered? Ah, but was it a jungle then? Said Yoward. This may have happened 5 million years ago. I said, oh, but surely it only took a few hundred years to bury Rome. How could this thing have stayed above ground for 5,000 years, let alone 5 million? Yoward said, it didn't. The earth swallows things and regurgitates them. This is a volcanic region. One little upheaval can swallow a city, and one tiny peristaceless groin. One little upheaval, in the bowels of the earth can bring its remains to light again 1 million years later. So it must have been with the machine from Mars. Microphone's in my way. I wonder who was inside, I said. Yoward replied, very likely some utterly alien creatures that couldn't tolerate the earth and died, or else were killed in the crash. No skeleton could survive such a space of time. So we built up the fire and Yoward went to sleep. Having slept, I watched. Watched for what? I didn't know. Jaguars, peccaries, snakes, none of these beasts climbed up to the plateau. There was nothing for them up there. Still, unaccountably, I was afraid. There was the weight of ages on the place. Respect old age, one is told. The greater the age, the deeper the respect, you might say, but it is not respect, it is dread. It is fear of time and death, sir. I must have dozed because the fire was burning low. I had been most careful to keep it alive and bright when I caught my first glimpse of the boneless men. Starting up, I saw at the rim of the plateau a pair of eyes that picked up luminosity from the fading light of the fire. A jaguar, I thought, and took up my rifle. But it could not have been a jaguar because when I looked left and right, I saw that the plateau was ringed with pairs of shining eyes, as it might be a collar of opals, and there came to my nostrils an odor of God knows what. Fear has its smell, and as an animal trainer will tell you, sickness has its smell. Ask any nurse. These smells compel healthy animals to fight or to run away. This was a combination of two, plus a stink of vegetation gone bad. I fired at the pair of eyes I had first seen. Then all the eyes disappeared for a while. From the jungle, there came a chattering and a twittering of monkeys and birds as the echoes of the shot went flapping away. And then, thank God, the dawn came. I should not have liked to see by article light the thing I had shot between the eyes. It was gray and, in texture, tough and gelatinous. Yet, in form, externally, it was not unlike a human being. It had eyes, and there were either vestiges or rudiments of head and neck and a kind of limbs. Yoard told me that I must pull myself together, overcome my childish revulsion, he called it, and look into the nature of the beast. I may say that he kept a long way away from it when I opened it. It was my job as zoologist of the expedition, and I had to do it. Microscopes and other delicate instruments had been lost with the canoes. I worked with a knife and forceps and found nothing. A kind of digestive system enclosed in very tough jelly, a rudimentary nervous system, and a brain about the size of a walnut. The entire creature, stretched out, measured 4 feet. In a laboratory, I could tell you perhaps something about it, with an assistant or two to keep me company. As it was, I did what I could with a hunting knife and forceps, without dyes or microscope, swallowing my nausea. It was a nauseating thing, memorizing what I found. But as the sun rose higher, the thing liquefied, melted, until by 9 o'clock there was nothing but a gelatinous gray puddle. Gray puddle with 2 green eyes swimming in it. And these eyes, I can see them now, burst with a thick pop, making a detestable, sticky ripple in that puddle of corruption. After that, I went away for a while. When I came back, the sun had burned it all away, and there was nothing but something like what you see after a dead jellyfish has evaporated on a hot beach. Slime. Yoard had a white face when he asked me, "What the devil is it?" I told him that I didn't know, that it was something outside my experience, and although I pretended to be a man of science with a detached mind, nothing would induce me to ever touch one of these things again. Yoard said, "You're getting hysterical, good body. Adopt the proper attitude. God knows we're not here for the good of our health. Science, man, science. Not a day passes but some doctor pokes his finger into fouler things than that." I said, "Don't you believe it. Professor Yoard, I have handled and dissected some pretty queer things in my time, but this is something repulsive. I have nerves, I dare say. Maybe we should have brought a psychiatrist. I notice, by the way, that you aren't too anxious to come close to me after I've tampered with that thing. I'll shoot one with pleasure, but if you want to investigate it, try it yourself and see." Yoard said that he was deeply occupied with his metal plate. There was no doubt, he told me, that this machine had come from Mars. But evidently he preferred to keep the fire between himself and me after I had touched the abomination of hard jelly. Yoard kept himself to himself, rummaging in the ruin. I went about my business, which was to investigate life forms of animal life. I do not know what I might have found, if I had, I don't say the courage because I didn't like that, if I had had some company. Alone, my nerve broke. It happened one morning. I went into the jungle that surrounded us, trying to swallow the fear that choked me and drive away the sense of revulsion that not only made me want to turn and run, but made me afraid to turn my back even to get away. You may or may not know that, of all the beasts that live in the jungle, the most impregnable is the sloth. He finds a stout limb, climbs onto it, and hangs from it by his 12 steely claws. a tardigrade that lives on leaves. Your tardigrade is so tenacious that even in death, shot through the heart, it will hang on to its branch. It has an immensely tough hide covered by an impenetrable coat of coarse, matted hair. A panther or a jaguar is helpless against the passive resistance of such a creature. It finds itself a tree, which it does not leave until it has eaten every leaf, and chooses for a sleeping place a branch exactly strong enough to bear its weight. In this detestable jungle, on one of my brief expeditions, brief because I was alone and afraid, I stopped to watch a giant sloth hanging motionless from the largest bough of a half-denuded tree, asleep, impervious, indifferent. Then out of that stinking green twilight came a horde of those jellyfish things. They poured up the tree and writhed along the branch. Even the sloth, which generally knows no fear, was afraid. It tried to run away, hooked itself onto a thinner part of the branch, which broke. It fell, and at once was covered with a shuddering mass of jelly. Those boneless men do not bite. They suck. And as they suck, their color changes from gray to pink and then to brown. But they are afraid of us. There is race memory involved here. We repel them, and they repel us. When they became aware of my presence, they, I was going to say ran away. They slid away, dissolved into the shadows that kept dancing and dancing and dancing under the trees, and the horror came upon me so that I ran away and arrived back at our camp, bloody about the face with thorns and utterly exhausted. Howard was lancing a place in his ankle. A tourniquet was tied under his knee. Nearby lay a dead snake. He had broken its back with the same metal plate, but it had bitten him first. He said, "What kind of snake do you call this? I'm afraid it's venomous. I feel a numbness in my cheeks and around my heart, and I cannot feel my hands." I said, "Oh my God, you've been bitten by a jarajaka." "And we have lost our medical supplies," he said with regret. "And there was so much work left to do. Oh, dear me, dear me. Whatever happens, my dear fellow, take this and get back." And he gave me that semicircle of unknown metal as a sacred trust. 2 hours later, he died. That night, the circle of glowing eyes grew narrower. I emptied my rifle at it, time and again. At dawn, the boneless men had disappeared. I heaped rocks on the body of Howard, made a pylon so that the men without bones could not get at him. Then, oh, so dreadfully lonely and afraid, I shouldered my pack and took my rifle and my machete and ran away down the trail we had covered. But I lost my way. Can by can of food I shed weight. Then my rifle went, and my ammunition. After that I threw away even my machete. A long time later that semicircular plate became too heavy for me, so I tied it to a tree with a liana vine and went on. So I reached the Ahu territory, where the tattooed men nursed me and were kind to me. The women chewed my food for me before they fed me until I was strong again. The stores we had left there, I took only as much as I might need, leaving the rest as payment for the guides and man-to-men the canoe down the river. And so I got back out of the jungle. "Please give me a little more rum." His hand was steady now as he drank, and his eyes were clear. I said to him, "Assuming that what you say is true, these boneless men, they were, I presume, the Martians. Yet it sounds unlikely, surely. Do invertebrates smelt hard metals and—" "Who said anything about Martians?" cried Dr. Goodbody. No, the Martians came here, adapted themselves to new conditions of life. Poor fellows, they changed, sank low, went through a whole new process. A painful process of evolution. What I'm trying to tell you, you fool, is that Howard and I did not discover Martians. Idiot, don't you see? Those boneless things are men. We are the Martians." That is the end. That is the end of Men Without Bones by Gerald Kirsch. Let's swap books. Read another one. Let's go to Tales to Make Your Hair Stand on End. Alfred Hitchcock's photo quiz. What the heck is that? It's not in the table of contents, whatever it is. Whatever it is, excuse me. Some child has gotten a hold of this book. Yes, there is blue pen on nearly every page. Oh, maybe only the first few pages. Oh, there we go. Pictures. Right there. What's this about? Just tucked into the middle of the book. Oh, I see. So, let me find what's probably a more recognizable film to anybody who's going to be watching this. Yep, right there. The caption reads, "From his apartment window, a news photographer with a broken leg thinks he has witnessed a murder in the building across the court. Rear Window is taken from a William Irish story, and the killer is played by an actor who went on to even greater acclaim in our genre. Name him." It has been so long since I've seen Rear Window, I couldn't tell you. Let's find out. Raymond Burr, from Perry Mason fame. Anyway, let's get a story out of this here book. Last checked out from the library in 2006, which is why it is now in my house. Let's see if I can get a little more volume out of that iPhone. Fine. Okay. Let's do this one. We might even get past the scribbles. The Room at the End of the Hall by Helen Nielsen. You must begin by accepting the premise that there really are spirits. David Cable hadn't reached that state of mind when he took the job of night clerk at the old Reardon Hotel, but he was of a sensitive and romantic nature and therefore capable of learning. Alvin Wyatt, to the contrary, was a cynic, and that was his downfall. Others, like Ara, the full-blooded Apache, who was the head maid at the hotel, never questioned the rumors of ghostly visitors who had long frequented the north wing of the third and top floor of the old building. On the night the two co-eds from Tucson evacuated her room in panic, she accepted the situation like the stoic that she was. "It's always risky renting rooms in that wing," she said, "especially this time of year." This time she referred to as Pioneer Week, an annual promotion of the local Chamber of Commerce planned to double the tourist trade with every lure from dancing in the town square to the rodeo and quarter horse races at the fairgrounds. For the greater part of the year, the Reardon Hotel, an establishment of 60 rooms, 20 baths, and the second-floor shower, where cowboys still came on Saturday afternoon to pay $1 for wash-up privileges before going out on the town, was the home of about 25 pensioners taking advantage of the low monthly rates, and a dozen or so students at the local junior college who were equally attracted by the economy factor. Occasionally, a scholar of Americana, aware that the Reardon was one of the oldest big hotels in the territory, would check in long enough to imbibe an atmosphere unspoiled by commercialism. The management was frugal. Safety and health standards were meticulously observed, but modernization had ceased with the installation of electricity and plumbing features of the Taft era. There was no air conditioning, no swimming pool, and no room service. The one elevator was a collector's item, and even the blotter on the registration desk was bordered with advertisements of stable and harness shops long defunct. It was what the younger residents called a real funky place. The oldsters merely watched the television in the lobby and waited for time to pass. David Cable wasn't a student, although the black-rimmed glasses he wore for nearsightedness gave him a scholarly appearance. He was 22 years old, recently home from Vietnam, and had taken the low-paying job as an interim occupation while awaiting admission to the University of Arizona. During the first week of his employment, he discovered, in a small storeroom behind the office, several dust-covered boxes containing the yellowed sheets of old registration books dating back to territorial days. An imaginative mind could conjure up an exciting past for the old relic of a hotel and lighten the ennui of a long night's desk duty, broken only by a routine hall check every 2 hours. There were 2 floors to check above the first floor, which consisted of the lobby, office, storerooms, and a small independently operated cafe that had once been a saloon. For the most part, this check consisted of searching the hall baths, the shower, and any unlocked room for derelicts who sometimes came in through the fire escape doors, which must, by law, remain unlocked. Also, fire hoses were sometimes pulled off the mounting, an undergrad's macabre sense of humor, and a keen nose was required to sniff out smoke from any guest who might have dozed off while smoking a cigarette. The second floor check was routine, but even from the first night, David sensed something strange about the north wing of the third floor. It wasn't the lighting, which was as garish as that of the other floors. It couldn't have been the sound of his footsteps. The shabby carpeting was identical throughout the building, but there were sounds. It might have been that the elevator groaned more when straining up to the higher level, and that the wind rattled the iron fire escape, more at that height. After the first few nights, it might even have been his imagination, stimulated by what he had learned from the old records. The north section of the hotel was the original building, and the third floor had been the deluxe section where men of important appendages to their names, senator, judge, doctor, or colonel, had left their signatures upon the registration books. According to the floor plan, there were 4 suites with baths and 4 singles with lavatories on this corridor. The 2 best rooms, 327 and 329, had doors opening onto an open balcony where the city and mountain views were unsurpassed by any other rooms in the hotel. It was strange, therefore, that only one of the permanent guests lived in the north wing, and even stranger that, according to the record, no transient had been booked into a room in this corridor in almost a decade. It was as if the area were off limits for everyone except the one resident guest, whom David never saw, Miss Melanie O'Farrell. That was prior to Pioneer Week, when the new manager, Charles Gerber, a hard-nosed businessman, lifted the unwritten ban on the North Wing and put the 2 co-eds from Tucson into room 328. "I've checked it out with the other hotels," Gerber said. "Every year they turn away people that we could have for the taking. I'm not going to sit here with 7 vacancies because of some old superstition that a ghost walks in the North Wing. Just keep an eye on those fire doors, David. Keep out the hippies, and we'll have no night visitors." In retrospect, it seemed to David that Ara disapproved the policy change, but, like all of her race, was loath to show emotion before the white eyes. Perfectly disciplined, the Apache conducted herself with the dignity of a lady whose homeland had fallen into the hands of a hostile power, which she serenely knew would one day self-destruct. David took a key from the row of pigeonhole boxes on the wall behind the desk and handed it to Ara, who promptly handed it back. "This is for room 329, she said. "That room can't be rented." David examined the key and saw his error. He replaced it with the key to 328, but Ara's comment aroused Gerber's attention. "Why can't we rent 329, he demanded. "Because it is reserved for Miss O'Farrell," Ara said. Gerber checked the board where the rooms and prices were listed. There were blue tags for monthly residents, pink tags for weekly residents, and white tags for daily rates. There was no tag for 329, merely a notation, "Do not rent this room." Gerber pulled the blue tag for 327. "Melanie O'Farrell," he read aloud. "Double with bath." "Oh, I see. O'Farrell has a suite." "No suite," Ara insisted. "She's holding 1 room." "Holding? How long has she been holding it?" Ara shrugged. "I don't know. I've only worked here 15 years. Miss O'Farrell was here when I came. She lives in 327. Once a week I change the linens in 329, but it's never used. I'm holding it, she says. Gerber studied the plan and shook his head in disbelief. It's the best room on the wing. Well, as long as she's paying for it, I guess she can hold it for as long as she wants. Make up 328 for the college girls. 15 years. David, there really are some books in this hotel. Some kooks in this hotel, excuse me. Gerber was right about that. The permanents included every phase of near solemnity, from the quaintly fey to Major Randolph, whose night dreams sometimes exploded into wild battle cries. And the younger set was one Calvin Wyatt student who had traded his sports car for a station wagon because he could keep a full-size bed available at all times behind the front seat. Calvin had splurged on a red silk shirt and boots to wear during Pioneer Week, when anyone caught without some vestige of Western attire could be hustled off to the local jail. He had the room next to the one Gerber reserved for the night clerk, and David knew that plenty of action went on in that room as well as in the station wagon. Husky and swarthy as an Indian, Calvin was attracted to the ladies, and David, who could afford only a string tie and a silver belt buckle for his gesture to local custom, envied him the knack. Another resident, was old Mr. Clancy, a retired miner who still toiled over mysterious maps and brought strange-looking packages to his room which unnerved some guests, lest they be chemicals that might blow up the hotel. Both Clancy and Calvin were within earshot of the desk where Gerber made his decision that dispatched R to the north wing. Clancy was at the soft drink machine. He drank at least 6 bottles every day because, he said, it eased the gas on his stomach. Bottle in hand, he approached the desk as Gerber hurried off to other duties. That Ara, he said, shaking his head knowingly. She knows more than she tells. She knows about Melanie O'Farrell. Clancy waited until David asked, What does she know? Well, that she wasn't always called Miss O'Farrell, for one thing. She was called a lot of other things, especially by the church ladies on the hill. Melanie, that's what she was called professionally. Professionally? David echoed. Melanie had the finest stable of girls west of St. Louis. Calvin brightened eagerly. Do you mean call girls? Clancy nodded. A dying art, he said. Nowadays the trade's overrun with scabs. Miss Melanie was a real pro. She started in the cribs, then when the fort was enlarged and business got more brisk, she built a house of her own. Finest house in that end of town. You can still see it, but it's a place for rumors now. It's these deteriorating values. Nothing is quality anymore. Melanie, now she was quality. She brought out a piano from Chicago and built a stage in the front parlor, had live entertainers from San Francisco, even New York. You might go so far as to say she was the cultural director of the territory. Leastways, hers was the only house in town that didn't smell of liniment and beans. Where did she come from originally? David asked. Don't rightly know. She used to say Denver, some New Orleans. I figured it was from someplace in the South because that's where Blackman came from. Brett Blackman, the outlaw? Clancy beamed his appreciation of an attentive audience. That's right. Melanie was Brent Blackman's girl before she worked the cribs or ran the big house. She was his girl when he and his gang robbed a gold shipment practically off the steps of the Denver Mint. $50,000 in new $20 gold pieces, and they would have got clean away if a little rat named Sanders hadn't informed to save his own hide. The law picked off the gang one by one. There was 3 of them, including Sanders. Finally, a couple months after the robbery, they got Blackman in an ambush. Shot him right out of the saddle as he was riding hell-bent for leather toward this very town. Never did find his share of the gold. $25,000, and they never found a dollar of it. When Melanie built the house about 3 years later, there was talk that she'd got the money. But I figure she made it like anybody else makes it. Hustling. Clancy cackled at his own wit. That's the only way to make it. Hustling. One way or the other. If she made so much money, Calvin challenged, where is it now? A rich woman wouldn't live in a dump like this. Skepticism pained Clancy. Oh, she made it all right, he insisted. Only one thing goes faster than money, son, and that's time. And maybe Melanie don't see the Reardon with the same eyes you do. Maybe she sees it like it was when the carpets were thick and red and there was a big crystal chandelier hanging in the lobby. Why, there used to be a big painting up at the 3rd floor corner of a lady wearing nothing but a red rose behind her ear. It was a fine place in the old days. Already, David's imagination was beginning to form pictures of the past glory. "Does Miss O'Farrell ever come out of her room?" he asked. "Scarcely," Clancy said. "Mostly she just stays up there with her memories, I reckon. Sends out for her meals. I've even known her to hire a car and go for drives in the country a whole day at a time, but not lately. Guess she's content. Sooner or later, no matter how hot the blood's flowed, a body gets content. Not the mind, the body. Now, David, you better take this old windbag up to his room or I'll talk all night." Clancy belched loudly and placed the empty bottle on a stand beside the dispenser. "Sure relieves the gas," he said. That was the last night Melanie O'Farrell had the north wing to herself, and the first night David saw the ghost. It was almost midnight before David made the first hall check. He covered the second floor and then took the grinding old elevator up to the third. Last of all, he approached the north wing. It might have been the result of Clancy's tale, but something made every sound magnified. The air seemed warmer, too, almost balmy, and with a tantalizing scent in the air. Was it magnolias? Orange blossoms? Something muskier, he decided. He found a window and struggled with the catch, but it was stuck tight. He reached the corridor leading to Melanie's room just as the bulb in a no longer elegant ceiling fixture sputtered and burned out. Now the corridor was lighted only by the neon glow of the night sky reflected on the small panes of the balcony door. The light moved as the door opened inward, and a woman stepped in through the doorway. She was small and slender. Folds of sweeping chiffon couldn't conceal the beauty of her body. Her face was shadowed, but the light silvered her hair. She might have been an apparition until, seeing David immobilized at the far end of the corridor. She spoke. "I'm sorry if I frightened you," she said. "I just stepped outside for a moment. I thought I heard someone coming down the street." Her voice was soft and surprisingly warm. David recovered his equilibrium and said, "There's likely to be a lot of night traffic this week. It's the Pioneer celebration." "Is it really that time again?" There was a touch of weariness in her tone. "That means we'll have that noisy parade. Perhaps those were the horses I heard." David still hadn't moved. "Is there something wrong?" she asked. He had to answer and couldn't tell Melanie O'Farrell that he thought she was a ghost. "The ceiling light burned out," he said. "I hadn't noticed." "You needn't replace it on my account, Mr. Cable. I'm going straight to bed now." Fluttering one hand in a gesture of dismissal, Melanie O'Farrell opened the door of 327 and stepped into her room. The door closed, and only a teasing fragrance remained outside in the hall. David turned uneasily away. Rhett Blackman, 1873 to 1906. Believed to have been the son of a prominent Southern family whose fortunes were lost in the war between the states. Blackman had a brief but colorful career as the leader of the Blackman gang which terrorized banks and railroads at the turn of the century. Calvin read slowly, tracing one finger under the words in the book. Above the words was a faded photograph of a fairly handsome man with a thick black mustache sweeping sorrowfully towards his chin and shaggy black eyebrows balancing the brim of a dark Stetson. David took the book from Calvin's hands and studied the likeness of Brent Blackman more closely. "He looks more sad than mean," he declared. "But Clancy was right about the Denver Mint robbery," Calvin said. "It's all in the book, even the part about nobody ever having recovered Blackman's share of the heist." It wasn't called a heist in 1906. "Don't split hairs. You should appreciate the fact that I'm uncharacteristically cracking a book instead of chasing chicks." It was true that Clancy's gossip had a strange effect on Calvin. Armed with a stack of library books, he invaded David's domain behind the desk the following evening. Each one contained a bit of the legend of Brett Blackman. One had a photograph of a young woman standing on the porch of an impressive Victorian mansion, with only the smiling portion of her face visible under the shadow of the roof overhang. "Well?" Calvin asked. David squinted at the pictures. "I can't be sure from this. The woman's dressed differently, and she's 65 years older than the woman I saw in the hall last night. If I really did see a woman." "If you saw a woman. You told me you finally saw Melanie O'Farrell last night." "I guess I did. It was dark and kind of spooky." "Spooked, you mean. You were spooked on old Clancy's story. I've got a theory about the haunt in the North Wing, and all the pensioners in the hotel swear by it. I think the whole thing's the work of the Indian maid Ara." "Indian medicine?" No, I don't believe in Indian spooks any more than any other kind, but I've noticed that the service room where all the linens and cleaning stuff is kept is way down on our end of the second floor, and that's about as far from the north wing as you can get. The Apache's no fool. She makes up those stories herself to save all those footsteps going up to clean the rooms. You must be sick, David said. Maybe, but there's nothing wrong with my vibrations. Oh wow, look at that, and look at these. Calvin snapped the book shuts and leerily opened as two co-eds, who had checked in earlier that day, pranced in through the street doorway. They were rigged out for the festivities in the tightest of Western shirts and jeans. One had honey blonde hair to her shoulders, the other had a cap of brown curls, and both had the latest in rotary mobile power. They can haunt my corridor any day, Calvin said. He was all smiles when the girls approached the desk, but it was David who grabbed the key from the box and followed them up the elevator. I'm the operator here, he said. Going up, ladies? He managed to close the door before Calvin could join them. If any guests in this hotel bother you, he said as the elevator ground upward, let me know. I think he was cute, the dark-haired girl said. I think the elevator man is cute, remarked the blonde. What do they call you? Elevator man. Mostly, hey you. I heard somebody in the lobby call you David, she told him. That was probably Goliath. With such brilliant repartee, the girls were shrieking with laughter when the elevator reached the third floor. They had spent some time at the old Crystal Palace bar at the square and caught the holiday contagion. Explaining that there was no light in the hall, David offered to walk them to their room, but the first-floor buzzer began to nag, and they produced a pencil flash to prove they were prepared for minor emergencies. They certainly weren't afraid of the dark or anything else within reason. Ghosts were not within reason. It was 4 hours before David saw the girls again. He was making his rounds on the second floor, directly under the stairway to the north wing, when they came screaming down the stairs, wearing near-transparent nightwear and panicked expressions. Babbling with fright, they told an eerie tale of someone, or something, that had opened the locked door to their room and stood watching while they slept. Something in white, cried the honey blonde. That smelled of perfume, the dark one insisted. By the time Gerber, whose apartment was adjacent to the stairway, reached the scene, doors were opening all along the second-floor corridor. There was no way of getting the girls back to that room, and the only room vacant on the lower floor was the one David used. It had no bath, only a lavatory, and was located next to the noisy fire escape door, but they accepted his offer without question. He gave them the key and went on upstairs with Gerber to inspect the hastily vacated room. They had left the lights blazing, but all was quiet. Gerber tried the key in their door. It had been years since these locks were used, and Gerber's grip was strong. There was the sound of breaking metal, and a piece of lock clattered to the floor. I'll get a locksmith up here tomorrow, Gerber said. You can see for yourself there's nothing wrong with this room. Nightmares, that's all it was. There were 2 of them, David protested. At that age, nightmares are contagious, Gerber said. I'll take their suitcases down, you finish your hall check. David stepped out onto the balcony of which Melanie O'Farrell had come the previous evening. It was 4 feet wide and had a wooden railing extending its full length. 3 doors opened onto the balcony, the one from 327, the one to the hall through which Melanie O'Farrell had come the previous night, and the one leading to the long-reserved 329. Draped from inside, no light showed at the third door. He tried the knob and found the hardware so rusted from disuse that the knob wouldn't turn. Retracing his steps, David locked the balcony door, then stepped back into the hall, closing the door behind him. There was no light at the transom of Miss O'Farrell's room, which seemed strange after all the noise the girls had made in exiting. There was no light at all, except for the balcony door. The air seemed heavier in the hall. A great flush of warmth came over him, and then he could smell the perfume again, strong and musky. Compulsively, he ran back to the lighted corridor at the head of the stairway. Then he paused as the sound of laughter welled up from the darkness behind him. A woman's laughter, low and teasing. But it was the sound of the spirited tinkling of a piano that sent him racing down the stairs. David made no more hall checks that night. He set out with his chair backed against the key boxes and his eyes fixed on the brightly lighted lobby. He watched 3 old films on the television set and was engrossed with the test pattern when his relief came on duty. Off duty, he went to sleep on a couch in the storeroom. It was mid-morning when he awakened. Because the storeroom had no windows, the door had been left open in the office, and whoever was on duty must have taken someone up the elevator because there was no one at the desk. Something like a shadow standing before the reservation board caught David's eye. He stepped to the doorway and the shadow turned quickly. It was a woman in full Pioneer Week regalia. dressed all in a black tight bodice, long flowing skirt, and a wide black hat. Tiny black gloved hands grasped the long handle of a black parasol that was used as a cane. The body could have been that of a girl, but the hair piled high under the hat was silvery white, and the still lovely face was webbed with lines. The sable brown eyes still sparkled with vitality. Embarrassed at being caught on the wrong side of the desk, she edged toward the key box on the opposite wall. "I thought I saw something in my box," she said, "and there was no one behind the desk." The voice was that of the woman David had encountered in the third wing corridor, Melanie O'Farrell. It could be no other. "I didn't mean to frighten you," David said. "I was sleeping in the storeroom. Did you hear the noise in the hall outside your room last night?" He watched her face for a reaction. She cleverly turned her head. "No," she answered. "I heard nothing last night. I took a sleeping pill before I went to bed." "The guests across the hall from you thought someone broke into their room. They were terrified." "I shouldn't wonder. Well, since there's no mail, Mr. Cable, I shall go for my annual promenade around the square and see what nonsense the city fathers have come up with this year." A fey smile played at the corners of her generous mouth. Still using the parasol as a cane, she stepped forward smartly. "If I don't break my neck on these fool heels," she added ruefully, "I only wear them during Pioneer Week. At least they're authentic." "You look lovely, Miss O'Farrell," David said. She dazzled him with a full smile that wiped 50 years from her face and swept magnificently across the lobby. Later, David met Calvin in the coffee shop and told him of his meeting with Melanie O'Farrell. "She's beautiful," he said. "You wouldn't believe a lady who must be 80 at least could be so beautiful. And I mean lady. She can't be the Melanie in the book." "Why not?" Calvin challenged. "Nobody said Melanie wasn't a lady. You heard what Clancy said. She brought culture to this town. Did you hear about the girls moving out of 328 last night?" Calvin grinned over his coffee cup. "Every weird detail, and it's great. They're next door to me now, and don't accuse me of spooking them last night, even if it does sound like a fun idea." "We can't blame Mara. She wasn't even in the hotel." Calvin grew thoughtful. "That's right, she wasn't. Maybe it was old Clancy. Motivation? At that age, who needs motivation? Anything to break the monotony. Besides, the girls could have been dropping pills and had a bummer." "Yeah, maybe. You're really bugged about the North Wing, aren't you?" "Forget it," David said. "Okay, I'll change the subject. I found another book on Blackman, and it tells what happened to the stoolie who sold out to the law. 3 years after Blackman's death, Sanders was found dead in a Nogal's hotel with a .22 slug in his forehead. That's a woman's gun. Gamblers used them. They were called sleeve guns. Well, look at the possibilities. Sanders caused Blackman's death, and Melanie was Blackman's girl. Gold disappears. Melanie works in the cribs, figuring Sanders will turn up someday. Through the grapevine, every strata of society has one. She learns where he is and hits the trail. Sanders dies. Melanie bigs a build house." David cried. "Now you're making out she's a murderess. How venal can you get?" Calvin sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Life," he said, "is very venal. Anyway, for your sake, because you're obviously a romantic, so let's say she killed him for revenge and built the house with the crib profits. That still leaves $25,000 and $20 gold pieces unaccounted for. Do you realize what they would be worth today? Many times the value." "Calvin," David said, "forget about the gold. That was 65 years ago." True to Gerber's expectations, the old hotel was filled to capacity by noon. When the grand parade started at 2 o'clock, Major Randolph appeared in full uniform to ride with the cavalry veterans, and Mr. Clancy, in miner's garb, marched with a pack mule laden with chilled drinks, drinking and belching all the way. Caught up in the spirit of the celebration, David never did finish his sleep. Once he caught a glimpse of Calvin carrying a six-pack of beer into the co-ed's room. He still had the book in his pocket, but it was obvious that he was imbibing more freely of the beer. David snatched his evening meal from a vendor at the park, where the marching bands had been replaced with an electric rock group, and people of all ages were dancing in the street. When it was time for his shift to begin, he returned to the hotel and was surprised to find Miss O'Farrell standing at the same place behind the registration desk where he had found her earlier in the day. "Miss O'Farrell," he scolded gently, "there's no mail until tomorrow." Startled, she grasped the desktop for support. "Oh, I must be confused," she said. "It's been a long day. I'm a little tired." He offered to take her up to her room, and she accepted eagerly. Once the elevator was in motion, she seemed to regain vitality. There was a gallant Captain Cable stationed at Camp Verde when I was young, she said. Was he kin of yours? Oh, I doubt it, ma'am. My people were teachers, mostly. Oh, dear. Still, there is a resemblance. She reached out and caressed his cheek with one hand. The captain wore a fine beard. You would look handsome with a beard, Mr. Cable. I'm so pleased that men are wearing them again. There's nothing more pleasing to the eye than a splendid young man with a beard. David was on the verge of asking her if she really was the Melanie of Calvin's books, but the elevator reached the third floor. The doors opened, and Miss O'Farrell, as if rejuvenated, stepped out smartly before he could even offer his arm in support. When the tip of the closed parasol caught in the warm carpet, she pouted. It was so much nicer when the carpets were red, she said, and when there were gay paintings on the wall. It's all so shabby now. Then the illusion took over. Before David's eyes, Melanie O'Farrell was young again. Her hair was black, her eyes were flashing, and the long skirt swished invitingly as she pranced down the red-carpeted corridor toward her room. From the wide staircase came the laughter of women and their gentlemen of the evening as they eagerly mounted the stairs in the north wing. The mystery was no longer a mystery. Carriages from Melanie's house must have brought her most talented girls to entertain the powerful men of the territory. The scent of their mingled perfumes filled the suddenly warm air, and from somewhere came the sound of a piano. It was as if David had penetrated a shim into the far side of time, and the strangest thing was how very natural it all seemed. He returned to the lobby and spent the next few hours taking guests up to their room. He told no one of what he had seen. It was many hours later, after the lobby was empty and David was making himself a cup of coffee in the office percolator, that he became aware of a man standing at the front desk. He was at least 6 feet tall. His eyes were shadowed by the wide brim of a dusty black hat, but a black mustache accentuated the long line of his face, and sideburns reached almost to the edge of his collar. He wore frontier dress, a long black coat, string tie, and a brocade vest. For all his size, he gave the impression of great weariness. Placing a small package wrapped in brown paper on top of the desk, he began to drum the counter with gloved fingers. I'm sorry, David said. We don't have a vacant room tonight. I have a reservation, the man insisted. B. Black of Denver. I don't see how that's possible. Well, look, Sonny. Look. It was impossible not to obey. David searched the reservation board where every room was tagged and noticed a white slip showing at room 329. It was written, B. Black. Oh, no, David groaned. Gerber couldn't have sold that room. The man didn't wait for confirmation, but had already stepped into the elevator. It was irregular, but he could register in the morning. Catching sight of the package on the desk, David scooped it up on his way to the elevator. You forgot your package, he said. Black grabbed the parcel. That wouldn't do. It's for my wife. He opened his coat to take a coin from his pocket, and David noticed that he wore a pair of long-barreled pistols and black leather gun belts strapped around his hips. Hey, those are beauties, he said. Peacemakers, aren't they? They sure do make realistic replicas of those old guns. Black closed his coat and dropped the coin into David's hand as the elevator doors opened at the third floor. I'm obliged, he said. Your room is at the very end of the corridor. I know where my room is, Sonny. As Black stalked down the corridor, David realized that he wore high Texas-style boots and drop-shank spurs that made no sound when he walked. Before he could try to understand this, the elevator buzzer drew his attention to the indicator. He was wanted on the second floor. He closed the doors and started down. Gerber waited at the second level, bouncing with anger. I told you to watch that fire door, he screamed. Do you know what those girls in your room are doing? Every young buck in town's been traipsing in and out of that room. They've got beer and reefers and different colored pills. I've called the police. In the hall behind Gerber, doors were opening one by one. He stopped shouting and hustled David back to the room next to the fire escape where the girls, one dazed and one nearly hysterical, were being comforted by 3 young men. It was Calvin Wyatt's fault, the noisy one sobbed. We were having a nice little party, everybody cool, and then Calvin dropped something that made him wild. He jumped up and yelled, I've got it! I know why that old lady spooks the north wing. She's got the gold in that room. Calvin said that? David asked. That's what he said. Then he couldn't get the door open. It was stuck, so he kicked it open and ran out, yelling something about the spooks protecting all that gold. He's crazy, man. Where is he now? Who knows? Last we saw of him, he was climbing up the fire escape to the roof. Oh, no, David groaned. He can't go into that room now. He shoved Gerber aside and ran back to the elevator. The first floor buzzer was signaling. Probably the police, but he had no time for them. Calvin was high and on his way over the roof to drop down on the balcony outside room 329, and that room was occupied. David ran the elevator up to the third floor and was racing toward the north wing when the sound of a gunshot exploded from somewhere in front of the building. He stopped, listening. There was no further sound, but suddenly the corridor that had once been warm and fragrant became dark and chill. He walked slowly to the balcony door and opened it. It was there he found Calvin Wyatt's body. He had fallen back against the stucco wall, his legs spread eagle, and a look of stark terror on his eyes. One hand clutched at the front of his shirt. David knelt beside the body and pulled the hand away. There was a round hole burned through the shirting, but there was no blood. The doctor who arrived later explained that Calvin had died of a heart attack. The pills, the sprint up the fire escape and over the roof, the drop down onto the balcony, any one of those he claimed could have killed him. Guests in the room vacated by the girls admitting to hearing someone was on the balcony, but denied hearing a gunshot. What David heard was shrugged off as an auto backfiring in the street. A cigarette stub found on the balcony accounted for the burned hole on Calvin's shirt. Only David knew otherwise. During the excitement that followed the discovery of Calvin's body, 2 doors remained closed. The doors leading to Melanie O'Farrell's room and the room reserved for B. Black. It was daylight before the balcony was cleared and David could make his own search. He found no bullet hole or shell casing, but there were chips of paint in the threshold of the balcony door that led to room 329, and the knob that had been rusted shut turned easily in David's hand. He opened the door and stepped inside the long unused room. The draperies were drawn, but daylight from the balcony doorway was enough to show that someone was in the bed. "It's all right to go in now," Ara remarked at his shoulder. She had come silently with fresh linens on her arm. She brushed past David and opened the draperies, and they could see that it was Melanie O'Farrell in the bed. A gentle smile softened her face, and one arm was thrown out across the empty space beside her as if in a loving embrace. David felt for her pulse. She was dead. There was something more. The sheet on the empty side of the bed was wrinkled, as if it had been recently occupied, and the pillow still bore an indentation from the weight of a head. David picked up one long black hair from the pillow. He telephoned the desk from Miss O'Farrell's room, and there he found the brown wrapping paper in a wastebasket and a bottle of perfume on the dresser. The musky scent was everywhere. When he returned to the other room, Ara had smoothed out the sheets and was putting a fresh case on the pillow. "It will be all right to rent these rooms now," she said. Nobody thought it was strange that Melanie O'Farrell had died in her sleep. She was a very old lady, and if she chose not to die in her own bed, that was her business. Someone say that she had reserved the room all these years for that purpose. David told no one about her visitor. There was no registration card for B. Black, and he knew that it was Melanie, not Gerber, who'd placed the reservation slip in 329. Everything fell into place when he searched the old registration books for the night Brett Blackman was killed. 2 rooms had been reserved for Mr. and Mrs. B. Black of Denver. The rooms were 327 and 329. Mrs. Black's signature was on the registry. Mr. Black never checked in. No gold was found in either of Melanie O'Farrell's room, but David, who was learning to keep silent about some things, like Ara, could appreciate Calvin's terror when he opened the door to the room at the end of the hall and was met by the blazing peacemaker in the hand of a gunman who had waited 65 years to complete a rendezvous. There are times when even a ghost needs privacy. Later, David took breakfast in the coffee shop and left a tip for the waitress. "Hey," she called out as he was leaving. "You've got to be kidding. The service wasn't that good." David hastily replaced the coin Black had given him with a quarter. He just wasn't up to explaining how he came by a $20 gold piece. Denver Minting, 1906. And that is the end of The Room at the End of the Hall by Helen Nielsen. And that's an hour, and I think that's all I got in me. So I thank everybody who stopped by to listen. Appreciate it. Maybe we'll do another one of these later. Who knows? I'll get maybe a little better setup next time. I don't know.